Daf Yomi, da na na na. Daf Yomi, da na na na. Da na 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 na. Da na 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 na. Da na na na. Daf Yomi, Shevuos, Mem Hey Amud Aleph, Tractate Shevuos 45a, top of the page. We looked at Yehoshua Eilus. Yehoshua Abikodoim. Ve'afilu Shevuos Shov. היה אחד מהמסכי בקוביה ומלווה בריביס ומפריח היונים מסכי שביס שכנגד נשבע ונויטל. What does it say? One is considered suspect with regard to oaths if he has been found to have taken a false oath, whether it was an oath of testimony or whether it was an oath on a deposit, or even an oath taken in vain, which is a less severe prohibition. There are also categories of people who by rabbinic decree are considered suspect with regard to oaths. If one of the litigants was a dice player, or one who lends with interest, or among those who fly pigeons, or among the vendors of produce of the sabbatical year, then the litigant deposing him takes an oath and receives payment of his claim. Hayu shnein chashudin chazor hashvu lemikoima. Divrei Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Meir Omer yachaloik. If both litigants were suspect, the oath returned to its place. This is the statement of Rabbi Yossi, and will be explained in the Gemara. Rabbi Meir says, since neither can take an oath, they divide the disputed amount. V'achen v'ni al pinkaso ketzad shelo yomai lo ketov al pinkasi she'ata chayav li b'matayim zuz. 200. This is the third time 200 came up. $200. 200 people injured, which was a mistake. It wasn't. It was actually 20. And wow, that's amazing. Matayim zuz. Ela omer lo ten li livni satayim chidin ten lepolis ela maoris. Hu omer natati. And how does this halacha apply to the storekeeper relying on his ledger? This ruling is not referring to the case where a storekeeper says to a customer, "It is written in my ledger that you owe me 200 dinars." Rather, it is referring to a case where a customer says to a storekeeper, "Give my son 2 sa'ah of wheat. Give my laborers a selah in small coins." And later the storekeeper says, I gave it to them, but they say, "We did not receive it." In such a case, where the father or employer admits that he gave those instructions, and it is also recorded in the storekeeper's ledger, the storekeeper takes an oath that he gave his son the wheat, or pay the laborers, and he receives compensation from the father or employer, and the laborers take an oath that they were not paid and receive their wages from the employer. Amar ben Nanas. Ketzad Eilu ve'eilu bayin lidei Shevuos shav ela hu noitel Shelo b'shvua v'hei noitlin Shelo b'shvua. Ben Nanas said, how is it that both these and those come to take an oath in vain? One of them is certainly lying. Rather, the storekeeper receives his compensation without taking an oath, and the laborers receive their wages without taking an oath. Amalechen v'ni ten li b'dina peiros v'nasan loy amaloid ten li oisei dinao amar lo nesativ lecha nesativ lach unesato be'unpali. ישבע בעל הבייס, שנשא לוי אס הדינר, אמר לוי, תן לי אס הפירוס, אמר לו, נסעתים לך, והולכתים לתוך ביתך, ישבחן בני, רבי יהודה אומר, כל הפירוס בידו, ידו על העליונה. If one said to a storekeeper, give me produce valued at a dinar, and he gave him the produce, and later the storekeeper said to him, give me that dinar that you owe me, and the customer said to him, I gave it to you, and you put it in your wallet, the customer shall take an oath that he gave him the dinar. If after he gave the storekeeper the money, the customer said to him, give me the produce, and the storekeeper said to him, I gave it to you, and you transported it to your house, the storekeeper shall take an oath that he has already filled the order, and he is exempt from supplying the produce. Rabbi Yehuda says, whoever has the produce in his possession has the advantage, and his claim is accepted without his taking an oath. Amar l'shulchani, ten li b'din amois, ונוסע לו יאמר לו, תן לי אס הדינר, אמר לו, נסעתי לך, נסעתו באונפלי, ישווה בעל הבייס, נוסע לו אס הדינר, אמר לו, תן לי אס המוריס, אמר לו, נסעתים לך, ישלחת לתוך כיסך, ישווה שולחנים, או יהודה אומר, Ein der shulchani liten isa ad litol dinar. Similarly, if one said to a money changer, give me small coins valued at a dinar, and he gave him the coins, and subsequently the money changer said to him, give me the dinar, and the customer said to him, I gave it to you, and you put it in your wallet, the customer shall take an oath that he paid. If the customer gave the money changer the dinar, and then said to him, give me the coins, and the money changer said to him, I gave them to you, and you cast them into your purse, the money changer shall take an oath. Rabbi Yehuda says, it is not a money changer's way to give even an isar until he receives a dinar. Therefore, the fact that the customer received the coins indicates that the money changer already received his payment. כשם שאמרו, הפוגמס כסובוסו, כתובתה, לא תיפרע אלא בשבוע, ואין דרך מעידה שהוא פרוע, לא תיפרע אלא בשבוע, מנכסים משובדים, מנכנסי יסוימים, לא תיפרע אלא בשבוע, והנפרץ שלא בפניו, לא תיפרע אלא בשבוע, וכן היסוימים, The cases of taking an oath are just like other cases where the sages said that one takes an oath and receives payment. The Mishnah, Ketubot 87a, teaches a woman who vitiates her marriage contract by acknowledging receipt of partial payment may collect the remainder only by taking an oath. Or if one witness testifies that her marriage contract has been paid, she may collect it only by taking an oath. She may collect it from lien property that has been sold to a third party or from the property of orphans only by taking an oath, and a woman who collects it from her husband's property when not in his presence may collect it only by taking an oath. And likewise, orphans may collect an oath with a promissory note inherited from their father only by taking an oath. Shevuos שלא פקדנו אבא ולא אמר לנו אבא, שלא מצינו בין שתי האוסף של אבא, ששטר זה פרוע. רבי יוחנן בן ברוקה אומר, אפילו נולד הבן לאחר מיתת האב, הרי זה נשבע ונוטל. אמר רבן שמעון בן גמליאל, אם יש עדים שאמר האב בשעת מיתתו, שטר זה אינו פרוע, הוא נוטל שלא בשבועה. Orphans who wish to collect payment of money owed to their father must take the following oath. On our oath, our father did not direct us on his deathbed not to collect with his promissory note, and our father did not say to us that this note was paid, and we did not find among our father's documents a record showing that this promissory note was paid. After taking that oath, they may collect the money. Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka says even if the son was born after the father's death, he needs to take an oath in order to receive the money owed to his father. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel said, if there are witnesses that the father said at the time of his death, this promissory note has not been paid, the son collects the debt without having to take an oath. ואלו נשבעים שלא בטענה השותפים והריסין והאפיטרופין והאיש הנושא את כותרת בתוך הבית ובן הבית אמר לו מה אתה תעונני רצוני שתשבע לי חייו. And these people are sometimes required to take an oath, but they do not owe anything, even when there is no explicit claim against them. Partners, sharecroppers, stewards, apotropin, a woman who does business from home, where she manages the property of orphans, and a member of the household appointed to manage the household's affairs. For example, in a case where one of these people said to one of the people whose property he or she manages, "What is your claim against me?" If the other replied, "It is simply my wish that you take an oath to me that you have not taken anything of mine," the former is liable to take that oath. חלקו השותפין והריסין אין יכול להשביעו. יסגלגל לו שבועה במקום אחר. מגלגל עליו את הכהן והשביעית משמטס את השבועה. Once the partners or the sharecroppers have divided the common property, each taking his share, then one side may not require an oath of the other absent a definite claim. But if an oath was imposed upon him due to some other situation, that oath can be extended to impose upon him any other oath, meaning it can be extended to apply to any other of their disputes. The Mishnah adds, and the sabbatical year abrogates the obligation to take an oath about a debt, just like it abrogates a debt. And that's the Mishnah, and now we start the Gemara. Zog deheli Gemara, kol hanishba'in shebatoira, nishba'in velo mishalmin minawan, de'amar akra v'lakach ba'alav velo yishalem, mi she'alav l'shalem lo Shevuos. The Mishnah teaches all those who take an oath that is legislated by the Torah take an oath and do not pay. The Gemara asks, from where do we derive that oaths mandated by Torah law serve only to exempt one from payment? We derive it from the fact that the verse states, the oath of the Lord shall be between them both, to see whether he has not put his hand on his neighbor's goods, and his owner shall accept it, and he shall not make restitution. Exodus 22:10. According to the verse, with regard to he who would otherwise need to pay, it is on him that the obligation to take the oath is imposed. Ve'elu nishba'im v'noitlin kule Maish Nasachir Nitakinu le Rabanan, Timishtaba Vishakir, Amar Rav Yehuda Bar Shmuel, Halachois Gedoylois, Shanukan, Halachois, Hani Hilchasaninu, Ela Ema Tikonois Gedoylois Shanukan. The Mishnah teaches that these litigants take an oath and receive possession of the disputed funds or property, and it lists a hired worker in that category. The Gemara asks, what is different about a hired worker that the sages instituted for him, that he take an oath and receive his wages? Rabbi Yehuda said that Shmuel said, great halachot were taught here. The Gemara asks, halachot? Are these oaths actually halachot transmitted to Moses from Sinai? As is usually indicated by the use of the term halachot, they are instituted by rabbinic law. Rather say great ordinances were taught here. Gedolos, miklal diga gedalos. The Gemara asks, since these ordinances are called great, one can conclude by inference that there are also minor ordinances. Are there rabbinic ordinances that are less important? Elo amar Rabbi Nachman, Elo amar Rabbi Nachman Mashmuel, Takonis Kevuos Shanukan, Akruha, Rabbanan, Yishvua Mibal Abayis, Yishadua Asahil, Mishum Kedei Chayav, Mishum Kedei Chayav Disochil. Consinun le Balabayis, Balabayis Kufel Nichale, Dimishtaba Sachil Shakil, Gehecha Diitagrun. And in parentheses it says delitagrun. Brackets rather. Le po'alim. Rather, Reb Nachman says, as Shmuel says, permanent ordinances were taught here. The sages uprooted the oath from the employer and imposed it upon the hired worker, due to the fact that his wages are his livelihood. The Gemara asks, due to the need to protect the hired worker's livelihood, do we penalize the employer by leaving him vulnerable to a dishonest worker? The Gemara answers the employer himself is amenable to the hired worker taking an oath and collecting his wages, so that laborers will accept employment from him. If the workers are not protected in this manner, they will be wary of accepting work. Adarabba, Sachen Nichale de Mishtaba Balabais. ונפקע כי הידי דלגרי בלבייס על כורחי הגל סחיונמי על כורחי מתרגל אלא בלבייס תרוד בפועליו הוא. The Gemara asks, on the contrary, isn't it preferable for the hired worker, in the case of a dispute between them, the employer takes the oath and is released from payment? He would agree to this arrangement in order to create conditions in which the employer will readily hire him. If employers are exposed to the risk of being cheated by dishonest workers, they will be wary of hiring. The Gemara answers, the employer perforce hires workers since he needs the work done. The Gemara asks, doesn't the hired worker also perforce accept employment since he needs it for his livelihood? Rather, the reason the worker takes the oath is that the employer is distracted with managing his laborers, so it is reasonable to assume that he forgot to pay. The Gemara raises a difficulty, but if it is presumed that the employer forgot to pay, let him give the wages to the worker without the worker taking an oath. The Gemara explains the oath was instituted to alleviate the concerns of the employer, to ensure him that he is not being cheated. And why, my question is, what's going to stop them from doing a false oath? I mean, why is a false oath so threatening? Someone who's crooked may not even care about lying, swearing falsely. They don't care about anything. So if they're not a believer and they think they can steal, what would make them stop from swearing a lie? Why is swearing such a buffer zone to alleviate the employer? Unless you're dealing in a really, really sheltered community where oaths actually mean something. That's my thought on that. And why did the sages not institute that the employer should give the worker his wages in the presence of witnesses so that it could readily be established whether he was paid? The Gemara answers, finding witnesses whenever he pays wages would be a burdensome matter for him. And why did the sages not institute that the employer should give him his wages at the outset when he hires him, so there would be no need for an oath? The Gemara answers, they both want the work to be done on credit, meaning before the wages are paid, as sometimes the employer has no money ready when he hires a worker, and the worker also prefers receiving his money at the end of the day. And now we turn to 45b, Daf Yomi, side B. Top of the page with the word ihachi. Ihachi afilu ktsat nami alma alamatanya uman omed shtaim kitzatztali hala omer lo kitzatzti lecha ela achat motzi mechavero alav ha'aya ketzitza vadai midikal mechir le. This is an important rule in Shas. Motzi mechavero alav ha'aya. One who wants to, how do they translate it here? The burden of proof rests upon the claimant. One who wants to extract from his friend, the burden of proof is upon him. And if we're going to think about these gematriatically, that has a numerical value of 755. In ordinal Hebrew value, this is interesting. The word Emmanuel in regular Hebrew gematria has a numerical value of 197. And in ordinal Hebrew ordinal gematria, the words Hamotzi Mechavero Alav Haraya is equal to that. So this is a very important principle, I think, in the subject of Emmanuel, because 197 comes up. And if you will count the amount of letters in the first day of creation from the first letter of Bereshis, Beis being 1, Resh being 2, etc., the first day of creation will contain no less and no more than 197 letters. Truth. Ihachi afilu kamat katzatz nami al matanya oman omer shtam katzatz gimla me'al katzatz yana al matibere ulaya katzitza vadai bidekal dachile. If so, that even with regard to that fixed amount of payment, the employer is apt to be forgetful. Why then is it taught in a braita? If the craftsman says, you fixed 2 coins as my payment, and the other, the employer says, I fixed only 1 coin as your payment, the halacha is that the burden of proof rests upon the claimant. There we go, the burden of proof rests upon the claimant. The craftsman must bring witnesses to collect the additional sum, and an oath is not sufficient. Why is it not assumed that the employer is distracted and the craftsman would be allowed to take an oath and collect the amount he claims? The Gemara answers, with regard to the fixing of wages, he certainly remembers. Ihachi afilu avar zmanu nami al matanya avar zmanu v'lo natan lo harei ze eno nishba v'lo yitze. The Gemara asks, if so, then even if the time the wages were due had passed, the worker should be able to prove that he has not been paid by taking an oath. Why then is it taught in a braita that if the established time for paying wages had passed, meaning the night after the work was performed and the employer had not given the worker his wages, he no longer can take an oath and receive his wages, but rather must bring witnesses to prove that he was not yet paid. Chazaka ein balabais over eval talin. Ve'amrit balabais tarud bepo'alafu. Hanimili mikame dirimte zman chiyuvahu. Kimate zman chiyuva rame anavshe umidcham. The Gemara answers, there is a presumption that the employer will not violate the prohibition against delaying payment of wages, see Leviticus 19:13, and will have paid the worker by the deadline. The Gemara asks, but didn't you say that the employer is distracted with his laborers and is apt to forget to pay? The Gemara responds, this statement that he is presumed to be distracted applies only before the time arrives that he incurs liability for delaying payment of wages. When the time that he incurs liability arrives, he takes it upon himself to remember to pay. The Gemara asks, is the hired worker suspected of demanding his wages twice and violating the prohibition against robbery? See Leviticus 19:13. The Gemara answers, with regard to the employer, there are two presumptions supporting his claim that the wages were paid. One is that the employer will not violate the prohibition of delaying payment of wages, and one is that a hired worker will not defer requesting his wages. Therefore, if he is requesting his wages after the deadline, he probably already received them, and he no longer can prove his claim with only an oath. יכול לא אמר לו, שכרתיך ונשאתי לך שכרך. אמר יצחק ישאל, וכן אמר יוחנן. Rav Nachman says, that Shmuel says, the sages, that a worker takes an oath and receives his wages only when the employer hired him in the presence of witnesses. But if he hired him in the presence of witnesses, then, since he could have made a more advantageous claim, migo, and said to him, I never hired you, he can instead say to him, I hired you but already gave you your wages, and that claim is accepted by the court. There is a principle in halakha that one is deemed credible when he makes a less advantageous claim that he could have made. Rabbi Yitzchak says to Rav Nachman, that is correct, and so said Rabbi Yochanan. Miklal de paligale resh lakish, iga de amri mishta v'shte, shatele v'shatikle, iga de amri mishta hava, shahele v'shatikle. The Gemara asks, can one infer from the fact that Rabbi Yitzchak said that it was specifically Rabbi Yochanan who says this, that Reish Lakish, who often engaged in disputes with Rabbi Yochanan, disagrees with him, even though Rabbi Yitzchak did not report that he does? Some say that Reish Lakish was drinking at the time. I'm not laughing, it just sounds funny. Maybe he was just drinking water, but I'm saying, when you say it in English, drinking means like you're drinking alcohol. So it's like, some say that Reish Lakish was drinking at the time, that Rabbi Yochanan made a statement and therefore was silent. And some say that he was waiting for him to complete his statement and therefore was silent. It remains unclear whether he disagreed. Idmanami, Amar Rav Menashe bar Zvid, Amar Rav, לא שנו, אלא ששכרו בעדים, אבל שכרו שלא בעדים, מתוך שיכול לומר לו, לא שכרתיך מעולם, יכול לומר לו, שכרתיך ונתתי לך שכרך. It was also stated that Rav Menashe bar Zvid says that Rav says the sages taught that a worker takes an oath and receives his wages only when the employer hired him in the presence of witnesses. But if he hired him not in the presence of witnesses, since he could have said to him, I never hired you, he can say instead to him, I hired you, but already gave you your wages, and that claim is accepted by the court. אמר רבי מחמה, כמה מעל יהי שמעיתא? אמר לרבא, מהי מעליותה? אם כן שבועת שומרים לחייב הכוונה, איך היא משכחת לה? מתוך שיכול לומר לא, לא היו דברים מעולם, יכול לומר לא, נאנסו. Rami Bar Chama said, how excellent is this halacha? How excellent is your name in all of the earth. How excellent is your name. Rami Bar Chama said, how excellent is this halacha? Rava said to him, what is its excellence? If the halacha is so, how can you ever find an instance of the oath of the baileys concerning a deposit that the merciful one imposed? Since the bailey could say to the owner, these events never occurred, meaning, I never accepted a deposit from you, he can say to him that the deposit was lost by accident. He will not need to take an oath to support his claim, since he would have been deemed credible without taking an oath if he had denied accepting the deposit at all. Rami Bar Chama answered, the oath of the baileys is still relevant where the owner deposited the item with him in the presence of witnesses. Rava retorts, even then, since he could say to him, I already returned it to you, and his claim would be accepted without taking an oath, he can say to him, the deposit was lost by accident, and his claim will be accepted without his taking an oath. Rami Bar Chama answered, the oath of the baileys is still relevant whether the owner deposited the item with him with a document given as a receipt. Possession of the receipt serves as evidence that the bailey has not returned the deposit. The Gemara comments, by inference from their statements, one may conclude that both Rav and Rami Bar Chama hold that if one deposits an item with another person in the presence of witnesses, he does not need to return it to him in the presence of witnesses, and his claim that he returned it without witnesses is accepted. But if one deposits an item with another person with a document given as a receipt, he needs to return it to him in the presence of witnesses. Who can testify that it was returned? וישים דוד את הדברים האלה בליבו. דרך ככה, הרב ששת לרב בר שמואל אמר לה, תני מה מידי בסחיר? אמר לה, אין, תנינה סחיר לזמנו, נשבע ונוטל, כיצד? בזמן שאמר לו, שכרתני ולא נתת לי שכרי, אלא אומר, שכרתיך ונתתי לך שכריך, אבל כמו שתיים קצצת לי, ואלא אומר, לא קצצתי לך אלא אחת, המוציא מחברו, עליו הראיה. Rami Bar Chama would cite this verse about Rav Sheshet, and David laid up these words in his heart. 1 Samuel 21:13. Rav Sheshet took it upon himself to find sources that would support or contradict the statements of Rav and Shmuel. As is recounted, that Rav Sheshet encountered Rabbi Bar Shmuel and said to him, does the master teach any halachot about a hired worker? Rabbi Bar Shmuel said to him, yes, I teach this braita to Sefta 6:1. A hired worker, within his time of receiving wages, takes an oath and receives payment. How so? This applies in a case when the worker said to the employer, you hired me, but did not give me my wages. And the employer says, I hired you and gave you your wages. But if the hired worker said to him, you fixed 2 coins as my payment, and the employer says, I fixed only one coin as your payment, the burden of proof rests upon the claimant, who must provide witnesses to testify that the wage was the greater sum. Rav Shesha suggested, since the latter clause addresses a case in which proof, witness, testimony is required, the first clause must address a case in which proof is not required. This contradicts the statements of Rav and Shmuel above, that the worker may take an oath and receive payment only when he has witnesses that this person hired him. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says,